All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for being here for this month's free workshop. It's something that I am trying to do every month, kind of in the third or fourth Monday of the month. But I am recording all of them and posting them to my YouTube. So if this is your first session, I invite you to check that out. I'll be sharing the link um, to the YouTube in my follow-up email. But I am glad that you're here today. We're going to talk about using the instructional hierarchy to guide coaching cycles. It's something I've taken a small dive into in terms of thinking about coaching cycles. So I welcome our participation today. I invite you to feel free to unmute and share your thoughts as we go. I am a very casual speaker, so if you do not need to wait for a prompt to unmute and interrupt me. And as always, feel free to use the chat too. So the goal for today, first, we're going to just ground ourselves in some shared definitions. So we'll define the instructional hierarchy, and then we'll consider like what do those learning stages and phases defined in the hierarchy? How do they inform how our coaching cycles might go? What are we learning from that we might apply to working with the adults that we support? Some quick norms here, and if there are any that I missed, feel free to unmute and tell me that there is something else that you would like. But I will name, there are some icons here that I just will put on the slide for some visual prompts for you. So if you see the person speaking, it means I encourage you to unmute and join the discussion live if you're comfortable. That is normally paired with a chat drop. So feel free to also drop your thoughts in the chat. I do try to be patient because I know that typing takes longer than speaking. So if I'm quiet for a minute, it just means that I'm giving us a chance to add our thoughts in the chat. And then this last one is a Zoom poll, which I'll use at the end to try and gather some feedback from today. Any norms that I missed for us? Okay. All right, well, let's do a quick chat drop. Feel free to connect with each other in the chat. Drop your name, your location, the school or district that you support, wherever that place of work is that you're finding yourself thinking about coaching, and maybe even your position so that we can get to know each other here together. It's always nice when we can find some colleagues that are doing the same work. While you're doing that, I'll just share a quick note about me. I am a coffee lover and a pickle hater. And I am currently consulting as an educational consultant, and I serve as the president of the Reading League North Carolina. And so the work that I do as a consultant, I support schools and districts with their instructional coaching and literacy systems while honoring the people that we are supporting in them. So thinking through the lens of who are we serving, both students and adults, and how are we leveraging them in our systems? All right, let's check the chat. Lots of good people here. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm just so grateful for you joining live, and for the people who are catching the recording. All right, I will let y'all connect. Does anyone want to unmute and say, oh, hello, also Marie. Thanks for joining. Yes, y'all, what's really cool about y'all that are here today is we're not only, yes, we also have Michigan in the house. Thank you. Also South Carolina and North Carolina, but also all these different positions, right? So we have some folks that are district level, we have some folks that are school-based, we've got a university professor in the house, right? And also thinking about supporting letters, which is just amazing, right? And the best part about that is all of us have some form of coaching work that can show up in the work that we do, which is what I love about the work that we do. Okay, so let's get into it. Like I said, what I want to do to start is to kind of define the instructional hierarchy. rather than assuming we all know. So I'll kind of share the definition that's coming up for me from some of the resources that I've been leaning on. But feel free to drop some information in the chat or unmute as well if you have anything to add. So Herring and Eaton in 1978 identified this instructional hierarchy. It's a framework that is meant to kind of connect student performance to instructional actions. And so their framework identifies learning in stages. And so and that's why I have these flowers here, right? So we've got, oh, did it switch? It missed my transition. Okay, so we have the acquisition, fluency, generalization, and adaptation stages of learning, right? So we think of this in terms of the learner. These are the stages that they are moving through as they are coming onto a new skill or being introduced to a new skill. Right? So, therefore, when a learner is new to a skill, this is where the instructional hierarchy kind of comes into play, right? In terms of starting in the first phase, which is something we can get into when we're thinking about our coaching cycles, right? We might find ourselves working with teachers who aren't necessarily new to a skill, right? So it's helpful for us to start thinking about where are they in these learning stages. So as we start to dive into what these learning stages look like, frame up your thinking to be thinking about that, right? Can we start to see any teachers that we support that we're like, yep, they're in this phase of learning, right? With whatever it is that we're supporting them with. Okay, so in the acquisition phase, the learner is not yet accurate with the skill, right? They may have an awareness of it, but they are not yet accurate. And we often find that there is frustrational performance when they are in this stage because the learning that and the work that they're doing with this skill takes a lot of effort, right? It's where our cognitive load is much higher. We see evidence. This is when kids are like, "Oh man, this is hard," right? And they're really frustrated with trying something out, and depending on the learner, they might give up a little bit, right? Um, and this can be true for our teachers too, because what's happening is because it's new, they're making more errors in their work, right? Which is why it makes it that much harder. But there are some key things here, right? The performance takes effort and it requires a need for support in order to do it correctly because it's in that new stage of learning, the acquisition phase. So, what does our instruction look like for learners who are in this phase of learning? Our goal is to develop clear understanding, right? Like we want them to get the skill and to be able to understand it. Maybe even like say it back to us, right? What is the skill? With accuracy. That is the goal here. Like, can they do this thing correctly, even if it's slowly, right? Because that's what comes in the next phase. We just want them to get it and get it right. So what our instruction will do to support that, right? We will see modeling. We might offer some guided practice, very controlled examples and practice for the learner. This is where we might find ourselves using examples and non-examples so that the learner increases their clarity and understanding with being able to perform this skill accurately. And then we will see that there's a high level of corrective feedback from the person who's in the teaching stance when learners are in this phase. So once we find ourselves getting ready to shift out of this phase, it's when we will see that learners understand how to accurately respond, right? Or how to accurately perform the skill. Again, not necessarily with automaticity and fluency. This still might be with a lot of effort and it might be laborious for the person who's performing the skill. So I'm going to pause here a minute and I want to ask you, can you think of any examples of teachers or experiences that teachers might have that find that they're in the acquisition phase or experiencing frustration with new skills? Can we think of times we might see that? Yes. Currently seeing this when it comes to EOG prep. Yes. Frustration, right? We see this in our students where they're like, new skill. Uh, it can be learners as teachers, students, both. Thanks, Carrie.
I'm thinking about an approach that we introduced this year, the juicy sentence protocol,
Mm,
trying to get teachers to understand how to use that to teach grammar and context. Um, that is definitely, we are definitely in an acquisition phase in some classrooms I can think of.
for sure. A new skill that we're asking them to immediately apply in their classroom, right? So if they're in the acquisition phase, what do we need to do in our instructional support, right? Even if they're adults, they're still learners, right? In terms of experiencing something new. Yes, a new instructional strategy. Thank you, Michelle. That's exactly it, right? New curriculum, goodness gracious. So many folks are experiencing that, right? So you put a teacher in front of a new curriculum, and that's why we often hear um, so much resistance, right, to giving it a go, probably because we are asking them to now maybe move from a place where they felt really comfortable with something, and now they're in the acquisition phase. So we can anticipate that there will be frustration if learners are in this phase, which is also informative for us as coaches, right? It's helpful to know, oh, like frustration is normal, resistance is normal, right? So we can prepare differently for that when we know that learners are going to be in that phase. Yes, letters constantly, right? Especially volume two. Throw us into volume two, and we're all like, what? Yes. Okay. So let's talk about the next stage in learning, right? So now we have learners who are accurate with the skill, they have a clear understanding of it. They've demonstrated that there's a clear understanding beyond awareness, right? Like they've had some practice and they get it. They're just doing it slowly, right? And it takes so much effort for them to do. I think of this with planning a lot of times with curriculum. It's like we haven't had enough practice potentially with the new routine. And so it's taking us forever. I'll never forget the day I was staying late after school as a newer fourth grade teacher, and my team just they kept leaving and I was there for hours, and I was like, oh my gosh, like how are y'all doing that? They're like, it'll get better, like you'll get better at leaving more quickly, right? But I needed to have that practice and experience in order to do that. I was building my own fluency with that, right? So learners in this phase, the skill is very like instructional for them, right? They're still kind of mucking through it a little bit. But they've demonstrated that they understand how to do it. So now we're working on their automaticity and efficiency with this. We want to be developing their fluency, getting lots of practice with it. We will also see that learners in this phase have a lower number of errors. They might not be gone completely, right? But they won't be making as many errors as they did in the previous stage. Michelle, I'm kind of sorry that we can connect on that experience. But it's true, right? Sometimes you have to live it and practice it, and get better, right? They always talk about Jordan, and the number of free throws he practiced, right, to like get better at all of that. You need to develop that automaticity in order for things to just like not, you don't have to think about them anymore, right? We got to practice it. Sorry, not Michael Jackson. I'm sure Michael Jackson actually practiced his moonwalk enough times that he could just flow across the stage without thinking about it. You can tell I actually love Michael Jackson. So there you go. Yes, the confidence is tough to maintain, right? So thinking from a coaching lens in the fluency building phase, maybe that's where we step in, right? How are we creating practice that allows the person that we're supporting time for success, right? Removing that frustration and thinking about what does the practice that we're offering the learner look like so that they're experiencing that success and will keep practicing. So let's think about that. Instructionally, we're working on developing fluency and efficiency, right? So that means that we might then be providing the right type of practice in this phase. We see that teachers will provide controlled practice and increased opportunities to respond, right? We're not just going to say, go off and practice in whatever fashion you see fit. We are controlling what that practice looks like so that the learner that we're supporting increases their success, efficiency, and fluency with that work. We might also then engage in setting goals towards proficient performance. And then we might delay our error correction, right? So that the learner begins to work on some of that self-correction, so that we're increasing their independence with the skill in this phase as well. All right, can we think of any examples of the fluency building phase for the learners that you support? Using data to support the process of a new skill, for sure. Yep. Help me remember to bring that connection back, Renee, when we get into like, what does this mean for coaching cycles? Because I think that I said that, but let's double check that I did. Oh, coaches practicing with one another. Yes, that's a great example, Carrie, right? Like we know and understand it, but in order for us to become more fluent with our coaching work, it's helpful to rehearse, right? Have some safe rehearsal with somebody. Love that. Other thoughts?
Okay, so it's a lot to type. So I'm thinking in this phase, I'm thinking of my teacher prep classes with students when I put them in what we call a short field
Mm,
experience, which means I put future teachers in classrooms to observe, right? And they work with maybe one student in a diagnostic assessment
mhm,
and actually analyzing it, right? So learning how to give it, but then analyzing it to then, make a plan on what would their instruction look like once you have this, diagnostic powerful data.
mhm.
So that when I see this phase, I think application, um, but we're still holding their hand, right? So not let
Yes.
not let go fully, still holding on to them, but gradual release there.
Yeah. I wonder too, right? Like, do they have more opportunities for at bats with that, giving that diagnostic assessment and then analyzing it, right? And how much more
Yeah.
efficiently will that become as they get additional practice with that
Right.
work and
Trying to
that
put in those
routine?
layers, right?
Yeah,
Like not just, hey, here's everything, ready, set, go, because then it's
exactly.
gonna impede that confidence factor.
Yes. Yep. Great point. Any other thoughts, friends? No pressure. Just leaving room for it. All right, let's jump into generalization and adaptation then. So in this phase, this is where we have the automaticity, right? And the accuracy. Our learner is fluent with the skill, right? So the skill is kind of at mastery level. It doesn't take a lot of effort because it's become automatic. And there might be some errors, right? But it makes me think of mathematical errors where we might see them more as more just careless mistakes. Maybe we didn't double check our work because it became more automatic, right? So it's like those types of errors are what will show up. They aren't the ones that maybe take us completely off base, but there might be a missed step in terms of a routine that we've learned or a process that we've learned related to the skill. So they still exist, but they might not need error correction at the rate that they needed in the previous two phases. So, what does our instructional focus look like? right? So we're thinking about generalizing the skills to novel situations or using the skill with some modifications, right? That's the adaptation part. So we're thinking about like where else does this skill apply? For example, if teachers are learning the juicy sentence protocol, right? Are there other content areas that those teachers support that they could also be trying that juicy sentence protocol with other texts, for example? Um, or might they modify that, right? If they're doing it with poetry, right? Like maybe they've learned how to do it with a fiction text, and now they're going to try it with a different style of text. What modifications might we make to the protocol that we now understand deeply and with automaticity in order to apply it to kind of this new and novel situation? Now, the teacher in this phase is a little bit less in the forefront, right? But also remains a really important part of this learning phase because the teacher needs to offer the right type of challenge in this phase. We're not necessarily going to just say, like, try it wherever you can, right? We're not necessarily providing controlled practice, but we might be guiding what that challenge looks like. So the teacher might be the one providing those challenging tasks and situations or recommendations about where they might try it. And then we're also going to ask the learner, like, can they name the big concepts and ideas related to this skill, right? We're kind of double checking their deep understanding of this learning. And again, the teacher will probably minimally need to error correct here, although we may find ourselves needing to help the learner remember some of the steps to the routine if the automaticity has led them to forget something. Any thoughts here? Any application to the learners that you support? Where might you see generalization and adaptation opportunities coming up? No pressure. Oh, Renee, I love what you're saying about letters bridge to practice, right? That's the intent behind it, right? You've done the learning, you've done the reading, you've done some videos. Now we want to start thinking about what does this learning look like in your classroom, right? Um, Love that. Students learning is, yes, with a model text, right? We have some sort of exemplar, and then can they find examples of that in their own texts? Mm-hmm. Yeah, moving into if we think of it from like an I do, we do, you do, right? We're in that kind of you do part and you do with something else for sure.
We were just talking about like with the juicy sentence protocol we were
Yeah.
mentioning. Are we applying it? Are we helping kids apply it in their own writing? Are
Mm.
we looking for, are we looking for it there?
Right. What a way to just like take it a little bit further, right? And make it a generalized routine for all. Yeah, great point. Yes, it's what they do with EdTPA, right? Like take what you've learned, now we're applying it. And when we have developed automaticity, like where else do we see the opportunities to put it into practice? Great. Okay, we're going to shift into thinking about this from a coaching lens. Okay, so we want to be thinking about knowing that there's this instructional hierarchy and that the instructional hierarchy was written with students in mind, right? Like it's a student learning framework. But many of the adults that we're working with, when we are in an instructional coaching role, we're finding that they're moving through similar learning stages, right? Now, I don't want us to forget any elements of andragogy, right? Like adults are not children. So we do have to keep that in mind as we are thinking through these learning stages for our coaching cycles. However, human beings, right, will go through these stages when we think about skills, especially when skills are new, right, or new to the learner. Okay, so just really quick before we jump into coaching cycles, just a little bit more like grounding in shared language. When I talk about coaching cycles, these are like Linda's idea of coaching cycles, right? It's these three elements. Because their coaching cycles are everywhere, right? And many different people have different opinions. But when you boil it down, there's three essential components to a coaching cycle. There is some sort of pre-conversation. There is some sort of practice, typically with the coach doing some supportive observation. And then there's a debrief conversation, some sort of feedback loop, right? And so how I see pre-conversations going is there's shared conversation in that pre-conversation with some goal setting, planning, learning, conversation around like, what are we trying to do? Are we clear on that? And then the practice and observation, the teacher that we're supporting is giving it a go, and the coach is right there to support and or collect evidence of that predetermined goal in order to support the debrief conversation. And then the debrief conversation ties back to the pre-conversation. What are we seeing that we said we were looking for during the practice and observation? What did we learn from that experience, and where does that move us through? Questions about Linda's version of coaching cycles? Okay. So just keep that in mind. These pieces of the table are gonna show up on the subsequent slides. So you don't need to like remember them. Okay, so we already saw this slide of the acquisition phase, but now we're thinking about it through the pre-conversation lens, part of the coaching cycle, right? So we know that our instruction is in this acquisition phase is focusing on developing understanding and accuracy. In the pre-conversation, the coach might be doing the heavy lifting of teaching and modeling. It might include some guided practice or rehearsal, right? So rehearsal is actually an essential part for a teacher in acquisition before they get into the practice and observation piece. They need time to get clear on what does correct look like or what does proficient look like in terms of giving this a go. So we might find that if an instructional coach is supporting a teacher in the acquisition phase, that the coach's role is a little bit larger, right? They might be talking a little bit more than we would expect, depending on the framework that you lean on, right, to support your coaching, because the coach is being asked to model and provide guided practice, provide the examples and non-examples and corrective feedback, because the coach is trying to develop the teacher's understanding and accuracy with the skill. Okay? So we might find ourselves doing a little bit more when it comes to this role, especially in the pre-conversation, so that there's clarity between the coach and the teacher in terms of what are we getting ready to try. Now, when we move into the practice or observation phase of a coaching cycle for a teacher who's in acquisition, right? We're not necessarily expecting perfection here, but we are working on correct actions aligned to the practice that we just discussed in our pre-conversation, right? So you do want to be helping the teacher practice the skill correctly. We might find that there is a need for in the moment correction here because what we're trying to do, especially because the skill is new, we want the learner to learn it right. We know that when somebody is in the acquisition phase of learning, this is the prime time where they might go off the rails, and that off the rails practice might be what solidifies in their memory, right? So it's why it's really essential that error correction lives in this phase. However, we have to do that respectfully, right? So going back to that pre-conversation, knowing what that will look like and discussing how can we error correct in the moment? What might we both feel comfortable doing when we get to that practice part? right? Will we have a quiet signal? Will we have some kind of way to communicate live will be really important. The tension between facilitative and directive coaching, yes. Both things can exist. It just depends on our learner and the teacher or the educator that we are supporting in that work, right? We can't necessarily always be directive and we can't necessarily always be facilitative, right? If we try to facilitate an educator who's in the acquisition phase, everybody's going to be frustrated. Everyone's going to, because you're going to keep asking them questions and they ain't got nothing. They got nothing to tell you because this is new for them, right? They're like, I don't know, tell me what to do. And it's like, okay, like I'm prepared for that. So in the practice and observation part of the coaching cycle for somebody who's in acquisition, the coach is probably much more active during that time, offering error correction, right? Standing alongside the teacher. You might even find some co-teaching needs to happen depending on the coach's comfort level and the teacher's comfort level, right? All of that can exist. We just have to remember that rehearsal and error correction are important parts of this learning phase because the goal, remember, is that we're developing the teacher's correct actions with the practice that we're working on. Make sense?
Yes, Linda, one thing that I just put in the chat is when you were talking about your
Yep.
pre-conversation, practice, observation, and debrief, and we're keep going back to what is the new skill in this acquisition phase. Can you talk a little bit about where in the Linda coaching cycle are we getting this goal from? Like if a pre-conversation is we're setting the goal, how did we determine that's what the goal was?
So that can depend on your system, right? For example, if your system has an instructional playbook to guide, like this is the way that we do things instructionally, right? Even if it's content based, that might be the reference that the coach is using and the teacher is using to support, like, what are we doing here, right? If you are rolling out a new curriculum, that might be the work that you're supporting, right? And the live practice might not even be with students. Like you might be supporting the teacher and getting better at planning, right? So then the pre-conversation will focus on the things and the routine that the teacher needs to develop in order to have better planning practices. And then the live practice might be the coach sitting alongside the teacher while the teacher does that, right? So I don't know that I have a very clear answer because it really will depend on the system in terms of what are they looking for, right? It might even be if there's a walkthrough tool that the district uses or the school uses, you might even use some of the indicators on that, pull out one indicator and say like, hey, we need to work on this, right? It might even be pacing. But I do recommend from a Linda perspective, whenever it can be bite-sized, right? And really, really something that you can really work on and focus on, you're gonna be able to apply this type of work better. Saying that you need to work on quote unquote differentiation is too big of an idea to make that your goal for your coaching cycle. What about differentiation, right? You got to break that down even further. Like, what is the thing that you need to be working on in order to get to seeing some evidence of differentiation in your classroom? Yes, school improvement goals, right? Here's the thing, school improvement goals are also really big goals. We want to improve reading proficiency. Okay, how you doing that? What does the data tell you that your students need, right, to be working on? Where is the teacher in their learning for what we know will guide students to improve their reading proficiency? Does that answer your question, Qatar? Because that was really good.
Yes, it does. Thank you. What I'm
Okay.
taking away is whatever it is that we're using, that this is an agreed upon, like a trajectory, whatever that trajectory is, the application, so that this is not a surprise when you sit down with the teacher and say, hey, guess what? Today we're working on, and she's like, where did you get
100%.
that from?
Yes. Yes. And even if the coach needs to guide that, the goal would be that at the end of the pre-conversation, the teacher and the coach both agree, like, yeah, this is important work for us to be doing in terms of classroom improvement and instructional improvement, for sure. Okay, so a debrief in an acquisition phase is still a little bit coach heavy because remember, the goal of this is developing accuracy. So the coach may find that they're talking about that corrective feedback, right? But you are also inviting the teacher to reflect on the target skill, whatever the thing is, that predetermined goal that we were just talking about. You're asking, that is what the focus of the debrief is. And we are trying to figure out, were there errors that need to be corrected or not? If not, right, if things were accurate, even if they were effortful, then we know we're kind of ready to shift our coaching support and start working on how do we become more fluent with it. If things are still inaccurate, then we stay here, right? And you might repeat and say to the teacher, okay, like, let's keep working on this until we get it right, and then we get better at it, right? Or faster at it. Which, remember, there might be frustration related to that because number one, we're adults. We think we should be able to do it fast. And number two, right, frustration is a hallmark of this learning phase. Okay, take a minute and think, what might coaching look like for you or for the teachers in the acquisition phase? You can just self-reflect if you want. Time-wise, I'm going to keep it going in 1 minute. How about that? But if you want to share or drop in the chat, you can. Something else to think about for you as a coach is it is really hard to support a large caseload of teachers who are all in this phase. This is a coach intense heavy lift, right? You're doing a lot of work to support teachers if they're in this phase. So if at the end of today, you kind of are starting to put teachers in buckets of places and you realize like all of the teachers you're supporting are here, that explains why you're exhausted, right? Because you're doing a lot of work to support a learner who's in this phase. And so it's also helpful to be mindful of that and also acknowledge the amount of prep required for a coach to do this well with a learner who's in the acquisition phase. Yes, layering on support, right? So that the work makes it down to the teacher's level. Oh, it's so hard. They might be further into fluency. Yes. Okay. And so what do we do when there's a disconnect between the people in our building, right? This is where it's hard and requires some differentiation on our part too, right? Like this is why we can't walk into every coaching conversation and expect it to go the same way, even if we're talking about the same thing, right? So like how might an acquisition phase conversation look different than a fluency building conversation, even though they're on the same topic? Yep. Yeah, the leader teacher disconnect is hard right now especially from a literacy lens. I get it. Okay, let's think about fluency building. We know that we are working on developing automaticity and fluency with the skill, right? The skill, whatever it is that we've deemed we're working on with a teacher in a coaching cycle. So in a pre-conversation, what the coach might find themselves doing is facilitating rehearsal opportunities with the teacher, right? We want to give them additional at-bats and opportunities to respond to what this practice looks like so that when they're getting in front of students, we're increasing their confidence, we're decreasing that cognitive load for them so that it's less effortful for them to implement whatever it is that we're working on. So the goals that you set here might not be about accuracy, but they might be about something related to fluency. For example, if pacing is the focus skill, then the goal might be looking for evidence of a decreased amount of time, right? What used to take us 20 minutes to get through in terms of the section of a lesson, we know the goal is 10. So are we getting opportunities to practice that and work on the pacing of it so that we're seeing that time decrease? We also might see that the teacher is not necessarily that the coach is not correcting the teacher, but allowing them to self-correct and identify areas where they can be working on developing their fluency with this work. And we're still increasing the teacher's independence whilst the coach might still be controlling the practice a little bit, right? Especially in the rehearsal part of a pre-conversation. Then when we get to practice and observation, okay, knowing that we're working on fluency and automaticity, the coach's role might be less involved than the in the moment error correction that we talked about for a learner in the acquisition phase. This might be more evidence collection, right? Timestamps of things if I'm working on that pacing goal, right? We want to have data that informs whether or not we're seeing increased automaticity and fluency with the agreed upon skill. The coach might also be looking for, is the teacher easily implementing this, right? Are we seeing that they're relying on their notes less and less because they're not needing to be reminded of the routine? It's becoming more inherent, more automatic for them. That's what we're kind of looking for when we are seeking to improve and develop fluency in this phase. So the coach might offer support to collect evidence, but hold off on error correction, especially in the moment. Then when we get to the debrief, right, the coach and the teacher can be working collaboratively on the debrief, especially if the coach was collecting evidence, right? It's like a data analysis meeting. Here's the evidence that we collected. How are we, right? Are we getting closer to what we said was proficient? Are we getting closer to what we said was our fluency goal for this work? What does the evidence say? Have we reached it, right? So we're really leaning on evidence here to know, are we ready to move on to generalization and adaptation? Or might we need more practice, more at-bats with this skill? So it can be really helpful as a coach in this, when you're supporting someone in this phase, to let the evidence do the talking for us instead of us saying, oh, well, you did a great job, right? Like we can actually collect data, tally marks, timestamps, whatever it is that tells us, yes, we did or no, we didn't. Okay, take a minute and think, what might coaching look like for you if you're supporting teachers in the fluency building phase? Renee, I'm thinking more about what you dropped in the chat and how it can be especially concerning to watch someone in an admin role who's in acquisition and so, like teachers know that maybe what they're saying is wrong, right? So like who provides the error correction there?
Part of the work we've done as ELS is we offer a literacy for leaders training for all of our administrators. And it works out that you've got some administrators who take that work and they actually implement it, and others sit there passively and don't take the information in. And so the piece that I put into the chat earlier about EOG concerns, right now we've got principals and school-based administrators who are telling teachers and shoving passages down the throats of some of our kindergarten, first and second grade children, which is not the mindset we should have. However, it's hard for us to hold that accountability in these coaching roles because we can't make those changes without support from others. And so think about the systems of support that we have. It's really important for us to all be on the same page,
Right.
which is why I suggested layering that so that we're all speaking the same language, because when you frustrate the teachers, then obviously our students are impacted more closely.
For sure. Yeah, great points. Michelle, I very much appreciate what you just dropped in the chat about this particular phase of learning might require more frequency, right? And consistency from us as a coach in order to develop that fluency, right? If we are only sporadically checking in on a teacher, but they are in the fluency phase, it's going to be really difficult for us to support them getting better and more efficient with any of the skills that we're teaching. That's a really excellent point. Thanks for dropping it. Yeah, we preach into the choir about needing our leaders to engage in this work, y'all. I'm with you. Right? We need everybody in it. All right, let's go into generalization and adaptation. And same process. We'll go through this, have the chance to share, and then we'll have the time to reflect too. Okay, so we're past acquisition, we're past fluency. So now we're in a place where we're thinking about learners who have shown mastery of the skill, right? And they do this with automaticity. So it doesn't take a lot of cognitive load for them to do the thing, right? So our instruction focuses on generalizing the skill, finding new ways to apply whatever it is that we've learned, right? Or starting to see, oh, I could try this little modification with what I did, right? But only because I've hit mastery. Right? Like we're not going to do it before fluency. We're not going to try to change it before we hit mastery. We got to get good with it so that we then know how to modify it, right? Maybe in response to our learners. It's making me think of like the difference between fidelity and integrity, right? It's hard to have integrity unless you did it through fidelity first. So, just keeping that in mind, like we've got to get to mastery in order to do the work in this phase as a learner. So in the pre-conversation, this is where the coach might take on less of a leading role, but still provide some guidance about places or areas or ways to try applying this skill, right? They might invite the teacher to try a skill in a new way. Maybe this is where you might see a change to more facilitative coaching, right? Have you tried this in this other subject area or with another group of students or whatever that looks like, right? Or you might ask the teacher to say back or explain the skills concept just to double check and correct any lasting misconceptions, right? You might be inviting them to share with colleagues at this point, right? Like how might they offer some of their learning to some of their colleagues? I also could see this is an opportunity for interleaved practice, right? Where a coach might say, remember that thing that we tried 2 coaching cycles ago? And, like you might have already gotten to mastery, right? But you might be asking the teacher to start making connections to previous learning here too. Because we're not focusing, we're in a position where we don't have to only focus on the current skill, right? We can take the blinders off a little bit and start to see like where else are we seeing this live, this new learning that we've acquired. And so then when we move into practice and observation in the generalization and adaptation, this is again where the coach might be collecting evidence, but in that new area, right? So we might still be looking for accuracy here because now we've tried applying it to something new. And because it's new, that in itself might present some challenge to doing it correctly, right? Or it might impact the teacher's fluency with the skill, right? So we might see, we try this in a new situation and the learner jumps back to acquisition or they jump back to fluency, the need for fluency or acquisition work from the coach. So that's what the coach is kind of looking for, right? Like, did something come up that we need to error correct and name? Or might we need to work on facilitating some fluency practice so that this becomes generalized to the other skill, right? That just tells us that they might not have had quite the level of mastery that we thought that they did, right? Because now it might be, or we might have presented them with something too challenging to try in terms of applying the skill elsewhere. So again, as a coach, we are still present, right? But we might not be the heavy hitter, the conversation leader. We might find ourselves asking questions, inviting reflection in this phase. Um, and it's also important that we are praising the teachers, right, during this phase, in addition to the fluency phase. But I especially think it's important here because we want to be praising them and praising their mastery of a skill, as well as the vulnerability that comes with trying it somewhere else. So, in the debrief, right, that's what we might find ourselves talking about is, did the coach collect any information during their visit, right, while the teacher was practicing about errors that need to be corrected? The coach, again, would kind of set that up in the pre-conversation and say, all right, well, here's what we're looking for. Remember the routine and ba, 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 right? And did we see evidence of that in the application here? And what did the teacher notice when they tried it this time? Did it remain as effortless as it did before? Or did the new situation cause us to be a little bit more effortful in the way we implemented it or rolled it out, and why? Right? Like what presented itself that we're like, huh, okay, that felt a little bit harder than the last time I tried it. Why was that? Right? It's a really good opportunity for reflection in this phase. Okay, so think about for a minute, what might coaching look like if you are supporting teachers in generalization and adaptation? I could see supporting teachers with a new routine, right? I know sometimes we work on even just school-wide instructional routines, right? Like even the juicy sentence, right? So what are we learning from the juicy sentence, right? We're learning that it's important for us to be analyzing sentences, right? And be thinking about what are the authors doing in this text that supports this really strong sentence. What is that asking us to think about? Well, we want to be analyzing text, right, in a critical way and thinking about the nuances of the craft that an author uses when they're developing a text. How does that generalize to text structure, right? Or the way that an author creates coherence or creates incoherence in a text for us as a reader, right? Like, how might that lend itself to starting to think about the routine of a juicy sentence to analysis of a longer text with students, for example? Yes, moving from one content area to another, right, is a really great example if the teacher is working in multiple content areas.
I was thinking a little bit about, as in North Carolina, we move into new standards in the 26-27 school year, the
Yes.
fact that we're going to have a lot of teachers who, my projection is they're going to go to the standards and they're going to try to pick apart the pieces that they already think they know, versus we have to go back into unpack our standards and look at our PLT questions or PLC questions one and two, looking at planning and unpacking. And I think that's going to be a
Yes.
piece that, if we're not careful, could easily slide back. So that generalization phase, it's their perception that they've generalized it, but reality is they haven't. And so
Oh,
trying to help frame that theory so that we don't let them go down the wrong path.
such an important point, right? Like oftentimes, especially adults, we see ourselves in the generalization and adaptation phase, and we might actually be in the acquisition phase, right? Or we might need to recenter ourselves in the acquisition phase, but might move quickly, right, to the fluency or generalization adaptation. Great point. All those standards, yes, they coming, they coming. Okay, so this can be a self-reflection, but I just want you to think about how might leaning on the instructional hierarchy increase our effectiveness in coaching cycles. I'll pause a minute there and I'll let you reflect before we close. And if you feel moved, please feel free to drop in the chat or unmute.
Linda, one of the things that I was thinking about that Marie and I were just discussing is it helps us plan, because we coach the school-based coaches and the school-based assistant principals, but helping us decide where we're going in during instruction time with that person, like the fluency building. We know that that's less conversation and more practice, practice, practice. So just helping us, I'm thinking about when we're using it as a coach around building our schedules, being intentional about where we're going, when, and why.
Love it. Yes. Thank you. And Stacy, yes, more structure, right, in our work. I love it. I love a structure. You can tell I love prepping for things.
Our district adopted a mindset this year of looking at skill and will when it came down to teachers and their abilities. And so we had to prioritize our time in coaching, and we divided between ourselves as coaches as well as our administrators. So administrators served as coaches as well for those who were able to, acquire that knowledge and move forward. And so those who had the least amount of will ended up with administration. Those with more skill, and sometimes not as much skill, but more will, came to us because we're not evaluative. And so this makes me think of that work and how we were able to make a priority on who we were working with, so that we didn't spin our wheels and spend time where we might not make as much of an effective change.
For sure. For sure. Yep. And if you don't have the skill, sometimes if you're living in that acquisition frustrational phase, right? Like your will might be gone. Like we might have to build that up to see that you're more willing, right? Yes, I know that y'all lean on cognitive coaching, right? So if you're constantly asking questions of somebody in an acquisition phase, everybody's going to be frustrated. So hopefully this just shed some light on thinking about a learner-centered approach that helps guide how we might be responding. Yes, Michelle, such a great point, right? Like all of this requires transparency. Like, what are we doing here? By Stacy. What are we doing here in terms of are we clear? Like everybody's going to be learning this, right? Like we're all in it, we're all learning, and we all might be moving at different paces within these phases or stages of learning. But we might all be starting in acquisition if something's new for everybody. Okay, so some quick connections here. This is related to the coaching system assessment that I developed. All of these, the instructional hierarchy pretty much undergirds the entire process, all of the process indicators that are shown here. And so I'll be attaching that in my follow-up email with the recording link for you. But I did just want to let you know, I also just recently wrote a companion ebook called the Coaching System Assessment Guide that goes into more details about the assessment. And so if you're interested in learning more about that, once it becomes available, I have a question about that in the Zoom poll that I'm about to launch. And just, let me know that you're interested and I'll make sure to share more information about that with you. Thank you so much for being here. I certainly love to connect with folks. So if we aren't already connected somehow, I invite you to find a way in whatever platform feels right to connect with me there. I am going to stop sharing a moment and stop the recording and launch the Zoom poll for the live folks.